Today we're going over the commander cards that are most worth buying for the month of May.
I'm Mia, and I love giving Miso scratches.
I'm BZ, and I love it when Miso jumps up and decides to sit on your lap. And we're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can't buy Miso on Card Kingdom, but you can buy the next best thing. Magic the Gathering cards and sealed product, and if you get $50 in your cart, that's free shipping.
And accessories. You know, we're going to be playing a spec game later, and we're using Card Kingdom to buy all of those specs, so you should go check it out. Maybe play a little spec game of your own. They have really great prices and fast and free shipping over $50. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
NERDS
at checkout, you can save 5% of your real money tax dollars on your entire order. They have sleeves, they have binders, they have organizational things that we really love, and a bunch of other products. You should go check it out.
Moxfield is a website. You may have never heard of it before, and you won't hear about it until later. And if you want to check out our Patreon, we just uploaded the monthly Spell Table exclusive gameplay. We played with Josh from We Came as Romans and Kirby from Fit for a King, so pretty sweet content over there if you want to support the channel.
Patreon's a great way to get extra content, including our podcast and deck audits if you've missed those.
But there is extra content that you have to get Thursday, May 2nd, and that is Nitpicking Nerds Playmats. This is Amber as Queen Marchesa, and we also have Miso as Displacer Kitten. And as an extra little bonus, if you don't like cats, or you just like us a lot, we also have the Nitpicking Nerds logo that are available. They're going to be signed by us, the Nitpicking Nerds logo one, and the cat playmats are going to be stamped by each individual cat. So everyone in the Nitpicking Nerds is signing these mats, and the first place to get them is Whatnot, Thursday, 8 p.m., This is going to be a serialized drop. So we've got 100 of the cat mats and 50 of our logo. And they're going to be going to the first people who get them.
You can collect all 4 signatures if you get all 3 mats. And it's just a really amazing way to help support the channel. These are really nice mats. They're like very thick and cushioned, stitch edges. We really love them, and we worked really hard to bring them to you.
Yeah, we got gameplay coming, and this is going to contribute directly to that.
And if you use our link in the description below, you can get $15 off your first purchase. If you haven't signed up on Whatnot before, that can be used to the mats if you want.
Yes, so we would appreciate you showing up there. Bookmark the show. Follow us on Whatnot. Make sure you're there because it's going to be really, really cool. So we've got commander cards most worth buying. These are cards that we're not recommending you buy 1,000 of or, spike the price of. We're going to talk about cards we're speculating on later. These are just cards that are 100% worth it for your commander decks. And the first one is a reprint that hasn't been this low ever. It's Terror of the Peaks at $20. 3 red for a 5/4 flying. Spells your opponent's cast a target. It costs 3 life additionally. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. This card has been fantastic. It's a non-combat win condition. You see it all the time in Dragons decks or like big power decks that are making a lot of tokens, your like Warp Worlds and Primal Surge decks. It goes pretty much anywhere. And being under $50 is surprising, and now it's $20.
I mean, I bought this at $40, and I was grumbling about it then, but $20 feels like a really good place for this. Plus, it's really nice because it deals damage equal to the power to any target. Not just like if you have Perforos in play, it deals it to each opponent to 2 there and there and there and whatever, but you can do it to take care of some pesky creatures or whatever if you have a bunch of tokens coming in. It's a really nice way to clear the board or just deal damage to opponents' faces.
I love it with things like Living Death, where you bring back all your creatures at once, and now it doesn't even matter what happens because Terror of the Peaks just is going to be brought back with them all, sees them all enter, and then you just deal like 100 damage. It's such a good card, and I guarantee you it's not going to stay down at 20. It's not going to go down to 10. It's probably just going to start creeping back up as we say this. So pick up your Terror of the Peaks for a deck. You won't regret it. We haven't talked about this next card in over 2 years on Most Worth Buying, and I think it's overdue for a repeat. Nature's Lore, 279. 1 in a green sorcery. Search your library for a forest, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. This card is awesome. It is a green staple. I think this is one of the go-to cards. Whenever you submit a deck to us, we're going to cut like Arcane Signet in a green deck, and we're going to put in this because the forest enters untapped. So you get the same exact return on mana, but your mana, your land isn't as susceptible to random board wipes.
I love this because you don't have to get a basic forest. You can get your duels, you can get your shocks, you could get your surveil lands, whatever, really. And if it has the ability to come in untapped, like shocks do, for instance, you can have it come untapped and use it immediately. I love this card. It's just such a good staple in ramp decks, or just ramping in general, and I don't really use Search Your Library for a basic land anymore when we have cards like this at pretty budget prices.
Yeah, this along with its friends, Sky Shroud Claim, 3 visits, I call it the holy trinity of green ramp. They're so powerful. They're so much better than all the other green ramp that does similar things because they just put lands into play untapped. And Wizards probably won't be printing too many more of this effect. they haven't even really been printing 2-mana ramp much lately. So I'm super stoked to get as many of these as I can for as many green decks as I'm going to be ramping with.
I think it's due to the fact that it's just coming in precons, like left and right, which I'm really happy to see. This is a great card. And I think I bought a couple when it was a little bit higher too, maybe like $4 or something.
Still not a bad deal.
Still not bad, but I would definitely scoop some up if you've been waiting to have them drop down a little bit more. Next up is a counterspell that BZ and I both love to play. It's Arcane Denial at $4. 1 and a blue for an instant. You counter a spell, its controller can draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next upkeep, and you draw a card, then 2. I like this because it replaces the card for you. They get a little bit of extra card advantage too, but it usually doesn't take you back that much, and you're usually saving it for a spell where it's like, no, I would rather you have 2 random cards than that spell to begin with, something like with a big punch.
Yeah, so I don't really like playing counterspell as much. I always play Arcane Denial over it, and that's part of the reason why the math just works out in my favor more. If I play counterspell, me and the person I countered are down a card. The other 2 players are totally, they're happy about that situation. But if I Arcane Denial you, you are up a card and I am even on cards, and I'd so much rather be even on cards than down a card. I'd so much rather 3 players be even and 1 player be +1 than 2 players be down 1 and 2 players be even ahead of them. So like, as long as that made sense to you, Arcane Denial I think is great. I think it's one of the go-to 2-mana counterspells.
I also really like this because unlike original counterspell, hi Miso, that it actually doesn't need 2 blue pips, and I love playing 3, 4, and 5 color decks. 2 pips is sometimes hard to get, especially in those 4 and 5 colors, so this makes it a little bit easier to counter spells unconditionally.
Yeah, thanks for launching yourself onto the screen, Miso. I'm sure everybody appreciated that. Sorry about the cat jump scare. We're going to move on to Rise of the Dark Realms, $9.50, which is as low as I've ever seen it. 7 black sorcery. Put all creatures from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. This is one of the reasons we say that graveyard hate is pretty important to have in decks, even if you're not predicting what your opponents are going to be playing, because there's stuff like this running around all over the place. Rise of the Dark Realms can oftentimes resemble a 9-mana win the game button.
I've had this just win me the game right off the bat because people have milled combo pieces, and just reanimating them all at once just means I win by accident. But even if you don't win, if you're playing a lot of decks that use the graveyard, or you're playing against a lot of decks that often use the graveyard, this can just be a big swing in your favor, and everyone has 1 turn before they go, oh no, like I really have to do something with this. Plus, if you're playing this in a deck where you usually use the graveyard and everyone else's stuff is just gravy, you usually have some sort of like dies effects too. So if anyone has a board wipe that's not full exile, you might be able to get double triggers off like Blood Artist effects too.
Yeah, this is why people don't want you to cast Farewell, because they got this card rotting in their hand afterwards. And I think shutting off these win the game button cards is pretty important, but that's why we play win the game cards, because they say win the game on them. Rise of Dark Realms is super strong. Next, we're going to go to a card that has only ever impressed us. It is Illustrious Wanderglyph at $10, and it's 5 mana for a 2/2 with Ascend. Other artifact creatures you control get +2/+2 if you have the setting's Blessing, and every upkeep you get a 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature token. This is a callback to Tendershoot Dryad, which was like pretty sought after, and then it slowly rose up, and now it's like $15-16, I think. That card is pretty good, but this card is actually just the same exact thing but better, because instead of making Saprolings and pumping Saprolings, this makes gnomes but pumps all artifact creatures. So you can have a big attack the turn you play this with all your other artifact creatures, whatever type they are, and then it has the same value of make a 3/3 every single turn.
This has been one of my most favorite cards to come out in the last like 3 or 4 sets. This is amazing. I play it in Galadriel, which really cares about creatures ETBing, but even if you don't play it there and you have a lot of artifact creatures, that's what it really cares about, and you just want more, or you care about tokens, or you're just in white and you just need a big board for some reason, this is a great card to do it with. It's pretty easy to get that Ascend trigger because Miso get out, because they count lands too. It's just permanent. So if you have a bunch of lands and a few treasures and a couple like dinky creatures, you are good to get that +2/+2, and it doesn't go away unless the creature leaves.
Yeah, as soon as even if you just played 5 lands and then played this as your first spell of the game, you get City's Blessing when you untap, so you can attack with a bunch of power. This thing is an army in a can, and it's really scary, and it kind of just demands an answer. because you're probably playing it in artifact decks, but like you said, even if you're not, it's just then an exact replica of Tender Shoot Dryad, which we know is a pretty good card. Just like Moxfield.com. If you want to know about all the Tender Shoot Dryad variants, of which there are only 2, you probably won't have a long search, but you can search on Moxfield.com. They do have a search function when you go to build your commander decks.
Moxfield is an amazing place. If you want to check out like my Galadriel deck or anything that BZ's rocking, he has a couple really awesome artifact decks like his 4-color one. You can go there, check it out, see what types of cards we've been adding and removing lately, things that we've liked and not liked. You can go follow us there too. It's really a great place to build your decks.
Nitpicking Nerds follow on Moxfield. That's a good move. That's a really good move. Just like playing Thematic Compass, our next card. It is $2.79 for a 2-mana artifact. 3 tap, search for a basic, put it in your hand. At the beginning of your end step, if you have 7 lands, it transforms into a land that taps for colorless, or you can tap it to untap target attacking creature an opponent controls and remove it from combat. So we're like not super high on Maze of Ith. And you might be wondering what the difference between this and Maze of Ith is. I think this is much more of a card. It can function as ramp if you are in the mid to late game where you're trying to get to 7 lands pretty quickly. It can be ramp, but basically it's like going to help you not miss land drops. It's always a feel bad. So it sort of like helps with that in the early game. You might not need it, but when it flips, you get a land that makes colorless. So you've kind of ramped in that sense, and you get to have the Maze of Ith effect. I just don't like that Maze of Ith doesn't tap for mana. So I'm happy to have this instead. And this actually does something early game, whereas Maze of Ith rots on the battlefield or your hand.
This is a little bit easier to get that effect. Plus, if you are in 4 or 5 colors, you can find a basic land card and actually get the color land you need, which can actually help if you just are really hurting for it. It only costs 3 mana to activate. And so if you play this and you only have 3 lands and you're just not drawing a ton of spells, you can thin your deck out a little bit too.
So because it functions in the early game and is pretty gnarly late game while still making mana if you need that, I think the Mana Compass is a pretty solid include. It doesn't go in every deck, but if you have 10 decks, I bet you could use it in one.
I think so too. There's so many decks that just profit off having artifacts, and especially cheap ones too nowadays. So I think this has a home in a lot of decks. The next card is a card I'm surprised to see so low. It's up the beanstalk at $2.29, 1 in green for enchantment when it ETBs, and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, draw a card. This is just so much value. Immediately, it'll draw a card, and you can play this super early game. And if you have ways to just get out big green creatures or spells in general, like green often does have the ability to ramp, this can be have a really good home in like Selvala, for instance, or Cascade as BZ has it, or just anywhere where you're playing big mana spells.
Yeah, this card slaps. I have Dargo as my commander, so it is like a cute way to like constantly recast him and sacrifice him and draw more cards. But I think there's a lot of applications for it, and I think why this card is not expensive is because it got banned in Modern, and I feel like all the hype for it just died. Everyone's like, this isn't fair, and then Wizards is like, yeah, this isn't fair, and everyone's like, oh, okay. But I still think it's got legs in Commander. I think there are some decks where I will happily pay $2.30 to get this like cantrip thing that can only ever give you more value. So if you have like Force of Wills, Misdirection, Solitude, all of those free spells that are like Commandeer is another one that like puts you down cards, this helps even that up, and it kind of just makes it really, really good. If Force of Will is even, your opponents are in trouble.
I mean, this is great. I feel like in the decks with big mana and you're like cheating stuff out, or at least going faster than your opponents, the one thing that you're usually missing is like, okay, well, I'm sitting here with an empty hand and this goes, nah, I've got you. You're good.
Up the beanstalk, fantastic, but in the right shell. Figure out that you've got some kind of big stompy deck, or you're casting multiple spells, like you can cascade a 6-drop into a 5-drop, then you're in Value City. So just jump over that hoop, and you've got a sweet card. What's our next one?
Our next one is Crackle with Power, a great way to end the game at $2. XXX red for a sorcery. It deals 5 times X damage to each up to X targets. If you can funnel a ton of mana into this or copy it, you can just nuke your opponents out of the game.
Yeah, when you pay 5 mana, that's the worst case scenario. You deal 5 to one target. Don't do that. Just pay any other amount of combinations, because then you get 8 mana for 10 damage, 11 mana for 15 damage, and after that, it just starts scaling up in the best way. And I wasn't originally sure this was that great of a reprint out of OTJ in the breaking news, but it was like $7 to $10 or something before that. So I was like, actually, this is probably another card that's going to go up. A lot of X spell decks want it as like their go-to #1 finisher because it kills everyone at once, and it's not that crazy if you can reduce it by that much. This is a very real win condition, and I'm sorry, Crackle with Power. I do not respect your game. I did not know you were that expensive.
I mean, there's so many places that can use this. There's like the wizard decks that's like, what's there, Kazaa, or there's like Lucia Kane, for instance. There are just so many places where you can just copy the spell too, like Storm King's Thunder, or like just copy the spell and then you just do this. And even if you do it for 8 mana or something and then you have the copy, that's so much more damage right off the bat. You just have a really nice like 1 turn for this.
I mean, really, Mana Geyser, Crackle with Power. That's basically all you need to make this work. I feel like Mana Geyser usually makes 15 to 20 mana, and throw down a Crackle, you just win. It's like, thanks for letting me into the late game. Thanks for tapping out. You're dead. I think in a higher power deck, this is Swick. This is Swith. This is Swith.
I would actually want to put this in my Zephi deck. I wanted to put it in there for a while, but unfortunately, this was too expensive. I think when I looked, it was like $12 or $15. So seeing it at $2 is such a nice reprint.
Yeah, it can fit into that budget deck now, which is pretty nice. So let's go to our next card. Oh, man.
It's one of Beezy's favorites.
It's toxic, and I don't really play it that much, but I love it.
It's shiny.
It's also strong. Nexus of Fate, $20, 7 mana instant. Take an extra turn after this one if it would be put into a graveyard from anywhere. Instead, shuffle it into its owner's library. So that means there's an extra turn spell that goes back into your deck. And coincidentally, if you empty your deck, the only card that can be in it over and over is Nexus of Fate. So it is a alternate win condition for having 0 cards in library, which I enjoy that a lot. I only play it in one deck, but it is a very strong card. And I think if it wasn't for that whole extra turn spells sort of break the social contract thing, if you've got a playgroup where extra turn spells are okay, get this card in your deck. It is so freaking good.
It's spicy, and it's at instant speed, and it shuffles back in. It does like everything that an extra turn spell like you want it to. And there's so few ways to actually exile it. One of them I actually did recently, Force of Negation. But other than that, it's so hard to actually keep this out of the library. And if you have tutors to go find this, just find it at the perfect time and go, okay, extra turn. Oh, wait, it just goes right back into my library. That's cool. I could just maybe go find it again. That's so nasty.
Yeah, it lets you chain things, and extra turn spells are already so broken, and one that you can find over and over. And as your deck is thinned out, you are more and more likely to draw. Even with just a single copy in your deck, I think it's still fantastic. I love it. Miso, he loves it too. He's
at the corner of the screen.
He's right on the edge. The other thing I forgot to mention about Nexus of Fate, because Miso is all over the place, is that, like you said, it's really, really hard to disrupt that alternate win condition. You can't even rest in peace to exile Nexus of Fate, because I can just choose to replace it. Instead of exile, I'll just shuffle it into my deck. So like you have to like Ashiok it, or dissipate it, or Force of Negation. It's really specific answers. So I love Nexus of Fate as a alternative to Thassa's Oracle, basically. We also have the next card, Coma, Cosmos Serpent, $5.50, which is pretty low for our little snake friend. 3 blue, blue, green, green, 6/6, can't be countered. Each upkeep, you get a 3/3, and you can sacrifice one of those serpents to tap target permanent, and it can't be activated abilities-wise this turn, and it gains indestructible until end of turn. So it's hard to kill if you can get up to that first upkeep trigger. Now it's like, okay, we can't destroy Coma. I can't wipe the board because they'll keep a Coma, and it's kind of like Illustrious Wanderglyph after that, where every turn you just get a 3/3.
This has been shining in my Galadriel deck too, because it can't be countered, and usually that's the big thing that people are worrying about with these upkeep type creatures that cost a lot of mana. But I think it's not as bad to get to the first upkeep as it might seem, because it's each upkeep. So immediately, if you play a second main and they don't have a counter spell or a kill spell, you're just immediately going. This would really be great if you happen to have other serpents too. You might have 1 or 2 lying around your deck. Yeah, Changeling, for instance, because then it can be sacrificed to give it indestructible. But even after that, it's such a good card. It's beefy. This is good like swinging, blocking, or just tapping stuff, or just making a ton of creatures. It's great.
Yeah, this card I think before was like $10 plus, and I got reprinted in a pre-con, which I think brought it down to where it's at now. And I did not think this card was that worth it, trending towards $20. But I think $5, that's pretty good for this, what I consider to be pretty fair, kind of clunky, but powerful if it gets going, like pseudo win condition. I think this is a fair card.
Isn't it funny? I'm pretty sure at this point, the Coma's Coil token might be more expensive than Coma himself.
It probably is. But people really hate Coma. I am not in that camp. I think if you want to put this in your budget deck, I really won't be mad.
I think he's value, but like I could see why he might get a little bit more annoying if you're ramping out to him. Then you play him as your commander, and then it's like, oh, he's dead. Okay, here he comes back again. Miso's adorable, isn't he? But
he's the worst.
But the next spell I've really been liking because it's a free spell if you have the right build around for it. It's Misdirection at $5. 5 mana for an instant, but you can exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay its mana cost, and you change the target of a target spell with a single target. That's not too bad if you're trying to wait for something to be like Swords, or if someone has like a target player takes an extra turn after this, you could target that right to yourself.
Yeah, this is a sort of a free counter spell. It can only sort of mess up a removal spell, but when somebody goes for a removal spell, goodbye, son. When somebody goes for a removal spell, instead of just countering it, you kind of gain control of it. You redirect it to their thing, or the best thing that isn't yours, and it feels like a huge blowout. It definitely makes up for the fact that you are exiling a card to cast it for free, so it's like a 2-for-1, but you're getting a 2-for-1 back. However, it is not a free counter spell straight up. You have to have a spell with a single target. So it's not going to counter a board wipe. It's not going to counter like Thassa's Oracle, but it'll counter any removal spell that's single target.
Including a deflecting swat. I mean, I think that would be pretty funny. But I'm not that mad at the fact that it's just exile a blue card, because we love Force of Will. We love Force of Negation. Those are genuinely good cards, and they make you exile a card too. And it's just the price you pay for free spells. Plus, if you do have things like Up the Beanstalk or Zephyr or anything else that really triggers off high mana or just mana casting in general, you could get a free trigger off that too.
Yeah, I think Misdirection's pretty strong, especially if you are on a budget looking for alternate ways. I think Misdirection and Foil are pretty good budget imitations of Force of Will, Force of Negation, Fierce Guardianship, that kind of thing. It's not that bad considering it's a 10th of the cost, or in Foil's case, like 100th of the cost, for a pretty similar effect. It's just a little bit more narrow, or you have to discard another card. I think totally fair. If you've got budget decks, Misdirection's great.
I think that's the reason why budget decks can hang with like precons or just like level 7 decks or whatever, because they're including all of this value that you don't have to be casting for their face mana cost, right?
Yeah, you let me build a $100 blue deck, I can have free counterspells in it because of things like Misdirection. So next card is not a counterspell nor blue, nor is it free. It's Ondu Spirit Dancer, $12 for a 5 mana 3/3. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you can create a token that's a copy of it once per turn. This card is very tricky. I love it in my Enchantress deck. It has been so strong. There's a lot of weird loopholes you can get around with the token copy entering. I had a sick play with this that I think is actually pretty common when you've got enchantments going in an Ondu Spirit Dancer deck. I played a Kenris Transformation on a random creature, and people let it resolve because they're like, oh, okay, that's not going to bother me too much. Now, when the Kenris Transformation enters, this triggers, and you can create a token copy of it on anything. So what I did was, I had a big, giant commander that had Ward, but since it's entering the battlefield, it's not targeting. So you can enchant a hexproof creature with the token copy of Kenris Transformation, or a Ward creature and not pay the cost, and then that creature is also nullified. And that works with any aura that nullifies creatures, or any type of aura that does these things. You can even throw it on shroud creatures with yours. But just that enters the battlefield, it's not only value, it's not only getting extra constellation triggers, but you can get real tricky.
BZ basically won the game because of this card. It's a great card, and I love the fact that it says whenever an enchantment ETVs, it doesn't say non-token. So if you like populate the token, like Kenris Transformation, for instance, you can also get a copy of that token copy and just like Kenny's T something else on the board.
Yes, and it can be whatever removal spell you want. Song of the Dryads, even Oblivion Ring, if you really wanted to play that card. This Ondu Spirit Dancer kind of goes off, and if for whatever reason there's weird ways to flicker this, you can then get more enchantments.
Yeah, there's also just like, you can use this to ramp if you want to hit your Utopia Sprawl and get like a bunch of them, or whatever, really. This is just like a very good overall type of card in your Enchantress decks, and I don't think Enchantress decks needed this when it came out, but you should have it if you don't have a budget.
It checks all the boxes for me because it's kind of tricky. You know, people are not going to see some of the stuff you're doing coming. It's pretty powerful, but it's not like obscene. You know, it's got once per turn on it, so you don't have to kill it immediately or die to a combo, but it's just a really cool card. Next is a reprint from Breaking News. This card was really expensive, and now it is not expensive at all, and I think if you have a Proliferate deck or a Counters deck, just scoop one up so you don't have to worry about it when Contagion Engine inevitably goes up from its $3 price tag. $6 mana artifact. ETB, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls. 4 tap, Proliferate, then Proliferate again. This is a little bit of an expensive engine to get going, but it proliferates a lot. Proliferates like nothing else.
I'm surprised to see that it was so expensive prior, but $3 is a really good price for this, especially if your Proliferate deck goes a little bit slower. I think that in some decks like my poison deck, for instance, it might go a little bit too fast for this. But there are creatures like what's his face, the blue guy who says proliferate twice.
Azuri.
No.
Tecuthal. They both say
Tecuthal.
that.
There we go. But that can really just put 4 counters onto things if you activate this once. That could be, if you have your Yawgmoth in here, that could be a bunch of -1/-1 counters on the board. This can just really go off really quickly.
I really also love this card with Generous Patron. Generous Patron says when you put counters on opposing creatures, you draw a card, and this proliferates and then proliferates. So it just gives you like a bajillion cards. So it has like little combos. You can basically board wipe somebody, take out all their tokens in a turn, get that proliferate going, reduce the cost of either the ability or this card, and you've got like a real thing cooking. But we're going to get to a little game that we like to play here, and that is a speculation game. All of those picks were great picks for your commander decks. You buy a couple copies, you keep them for decks, and you play them. However, every month we do a little game where we just speculate on something because we think it'll go up in price at a certain point. So previously, I am plus $1 on my Keeper of Secrets spec from last month, and then Mia was break even on her spec,
which is Jorian Ruin Diver.
Right. So this month I am going to speculate on Assault Intercessor. And by the way, when we say speculate, we mean buy 5 copies because we're not rich. So this is a 59-cent card that makes your opponents lose 2 life when their creatures die. And I think that Massacre Worm effect, sort of cut in half mana-wise and then just put on a cheaper body where you can play this and a board wipe in the same turn, I think that's pretty strong. And again, with these I just keep going after Warhammer cards because I don't know when these things are going to be reprinted, if ever.
That is very good reasoning. I actually have a Warhammer card for my next month's spec, but this month I am going after Calamity of the Titans at 99 cents. Basically, I'm trying to write on the fact that there's a lot of Eldrazi hype coming from Modern Horizons 3, and this is one of the cards that came out in the old Eldrazi Precon from Commander Masters, and it hasn't really had that many printings of it.
I think that's smart. I think there's going to be demand for this for sure. I think these are both good specs. I am not sure who's going to win next month, but if you want to see last month's specs, last month's picks for best cards, the most worth buying is right here. It's one click away.